welcome Justin Brown. Justin Brown is the Chief Supply Chain Officer at the Dollar Shave Club. And previously, he was the Director of North American Supply Chain Planning at S.E. Johnson and the Senior Supply Planning Manager at Unilever. So thanks for talking to us today about risk in the supply chain.
Yeah, absolutely, Sarah. Appreciate you having me here. Happy to be connecting.
Awesome. So I think that, many executives today are concerned about disruptions, especially after COVID. And wonder if you can address some things that, the Dollar Shave Club, your team has done for addressing potential disruptions, especially with a smaller company. And how do you deal with some of the, rising costs?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I do think there's interesting distinctions between some of the activities that we would take at a company the size like Dollar Shave Club versus a behemoth company like a Unilever in terms of tools and resources that are available to some but not others. And so we are a bit of a smaller organization, especially now that we are truly a standalone operation. And so we really focus, instead of really looking at the latest and greatest cutting edge technology and data, automation, that is, we are really looking at how our physical network is designed in light of all of the things we've learned over the last 3 years. And so over the last, call it 18 months, we spent a lot of effort and energy and really redesigning certain parts of our supply chain when it comes to physical product production and then proximity to the biggest markets we operate in. So prior to COVID, and historically speaking, when you think about the context of our organization, we are a global supply chain. We have products that come out of China. We have a manufacturing facility in Israel, but we sell 90+% of our business here in the U.S. And so as we really look to minimize disruptions based on lead times and geopolitical conflicts in other parts of the world, spikes in demand because of things like COVID, we spent a lot of effort on focusing to move things closer to the majority of where our demand lives. And that is probably a pretty obvious thing to think through or to think about. But we looked at it in a way that, we were trying to optimize both responsiveness, flexibility, speed to market, again, with supply and supply capacity, but also looking at it and how can we do that to protect our business, to predict risks and be faster to respond where things may run out of stock or certain operations may halt for a duration of time, but also doing it at a better cost if we can. So one thing we did was really, it's a concept called nearshoring, which is pretty obvious, right? It's putting the base of operation closer to where the majority of your business lives. And we've looked at moving some things out of China into Mexico, obviously much closer to the United States. And so we were able to do that in a way that actually provided more protection and risk mitigation, in addition to lowering some costs for us. We didn't move everything. We were strategic in the product forms and the demand types, I guess, that we put in other locations. But we did that by establishing new relationships with new providers, as well as standing up a bit of our own operation with our own people and capabilities in different locations. So that it accomplished not only the close proximity that we were looking for, where if there were certain delays coming out of China, as everyone is aware, I mean, that was one of the biggest pinch points in COVID because of the shutdowns and everything. And so that was a big problem for us. And so now we have what I would consider a redundant capacity in both Mexico and China. So we can still get volume out of both places, but now we are much more flexible in terms of if we have to ramp one up and ramp one down, as well as taking advantage of the cost savings there. So that's just one thing we've done. And so redundancies, as I kind of move to that point, is another important concept for us to look at. And so again, it's really about identifying where you may have single points of failure in your supply chain. So quite frankly, we do have a single point of failure in our razor manufacturing process today, because our flagship razor manufacturing site, as I mentioned, it is in Israel. I think we're all aware of the conflict that's occurring in that part of the world right now. And so that's a risk for us that we're currently living with at the moment. But in order for us to ensure we have options in the unfortunate and hopefully unlikely event that our site becomes unoperable, we have been talking with other third-party providers that we could leverage very quickly in order to continue with a viable level of supply. It wouldn't necessarily be completely ideal. The product formats may be a little bit different, but at least in terms of having an option, We've already engaged in discussions and agreements with other suppliers that would allow us to help with that. And so that's just something else we've done. The last thing I would say is we have done a bit of research in the past as well. We haven't gone down this path necessarily yet, but digital twin is something that's been around for a while. It's something that can help organizations really kind of map out your entire end-to-end supply chain. I actually say your entire end-to-end value chain. So your own supply chain, your supplier supply chains, your customer supply chains, and really get granular with the digital level of assessment in terms of where everything's laid out. And it helps you identify via an automated analysis of where you may have risks or pinch points in your supply chain that may not be that obvious as some of the examples I've used before. And so digital twinning is something that I think has been very useful in our industry over the last 5 to 10 years. And as I mentioned, even last year, we talked to a handful of suppliers and looked at potentially using that as part of our own network, optimization analysis. We haven't really gone farther down that path yet because, again, we are small. We are a little bit more scrappy and nimble in terms of what our teams can focus on. And so we've just prioritized some of the other actions that I kind of mentioned before. But I would say from a technology standpoint, digital twinning is something that I find would be very useful in helping to at least identify some of these things for companies as well.
You mentioned geopolitical risk, and of course, there are a ton, especially you're dealing with Israel, you're talking about China. What are some specific risks that you're really concerned about these days? Are those the main ones? What are you looking at?
Yeah, I mean, it's, of course, I mean, the conflict in Israel is the biggest, focus area for us at the moment. As I mentioned, we've been proactive in taking actions and at least engaging with other suppliers to help mitigate potential losses if that were to come to pass. Thank goodness to this point, based on where our factory is located in Israel, it's actually quite far in the north, far away from Gaza. The port of Haifa is where everything we have ships out through the Mediterranean across the seas. The port's not been disrupted to this point, but again, you never know. And so, yes, that's overwhelming the top issue that we have. But with that said, even in the absence of a massive catastrophe there, we have already started taking a significant amount of action to be as proactive as we can to produce more and ship more out to the U.S. that quite frankly is outpacing our current rate of demand pretty substantially. So it's the age-old, hey, let's just build more inventory to protect against risk, which is the most obvious and simplistic thing you can do. Now, obviously, it comes at a cost, right? Because now you've got more cash tied up in working capital and you've got more liability and risk of potential future obsolescence and all the things we all know about. However, I do think that concept for even broader industries outside of even our small little Dollar Shave Club operation are starting to look at this again. It's kind of like one of those things being back to the future. It's like, okay, just-in-time supply chains were all the rage for the longest time. And it made a lot of sense in terms of cutting cost out and trying to be as flexible and responsive as possible, but doing it at the lowest possible cost. And then COVID came along. And I think you've got a lot of people really rethinking that. In fact, I was just at a conference this week called Manifest, where you had a ton of people talking about, what is the current state of supply chain. And they're talking about needing to really focus on going back to a level of how can we ensure supply chains don't break as easily. And there's all kinds of new terms being thrown around about, a break-proof supply chains, which that didn't really exist a couple of years ago, so I'm sure new buzzwords are being born out of all of these, concepts, but it is kind of like going back in time a bit. So we've done that as well and really beefed up where we think we need to protect against geopolitical conflicts in Israel, but also just protecting against a level of disruption that we don't see coming yet. I mean, nobody saw COVID coming. I mean, if they said they did, they were probably not being truthful. And so I think that caught everybody by surprise. And the reality is we don't know what the next big thing will be. We just don't. And whether it's war, whether it's, another pandemic, whether it's something else we're not even predicting. And so how can you really protect yourself without even knowing what are the nature of the next risks that come? And inventory positioning strategically for us has made a lot of sense. And so we've actively started to do that and being supported and helped with speed by the nearshoring operation in Mexico, as well as just being a bit proactive of things that come out of Israel.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Is there anything that you might recommend in terms of risk coping mechanisms, such as you mentioned the digital twin. Is that something you guys have already implemented? Have you found that relatively easy to implement, or are there other sorts of like visibility tools, or business continuity plans, things like that, that you might recommend to other companies?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would recommend digital twin. I raised it because we have investigated, we've assessed it, and we haven't rolled it out yet because again, for us and the scale of our resources and our operation, it's something that will be on our roadmap down the road as we continue to look to grow from an omni-channel approach, which both means retail as well as our e-commerce direct-to-consumer side of the business. We've piloted the concept, we've piloted the technology, we've engaged with a few different companies who provide that level of service, and I found it incredibly interesting. I can't speak to the ease of implementation on the front end because it will require a good bit of work to get the right data in the system available for the system and the tool to do its thing and really give you a true end-to-end assessment of where the risks and the pain points may be in your entire supply chain network. But yes, I mean, I would say if companies are familiar with it, or even if they're not, I would say it's a helpful tool that really takes cutting edge technology and does the work that maybe years ago would take a team of people weeks and weeks and weeks to do. And then once you get the data in, I mean, it's a click of a button and it's an assessment that could be an output for you to really help make better decisions. That's one where I would say for sure I'd have that recommendation. The other things that I'm going to say, I'm sure most of my peers are like, well, of course, duh, we know this already. But I mean, we are being deliberate in redundancies in our supply chain. I talked about the nearshoring. I talked about proactive inventory management. But redundancies in the supply chain where you have single points of failure are something, it is something that we continue to look at continuously. And as fate would have it, this year, we're doing a lot of work to stand up an additional retail, sorry, my computer's shaking because that was an earthquake. Oh, that's a big one.
Do you need to get under a table?
No, we're good. Sorry, that was a little distracting. That was a big one. Sorry, where was I?
Wow.
Yeah, wow.
Speaking of risk.
Yeah, the thing is, I grew up in Tennessee and used to tornado warnings and flash
Yeah.
floods and thunderstorms, but out here in California, we don't get a lot of rain, but we do get the earthquakes. That was a big one though. So apologies. Oh, where was I? So redundancies in supply chain. We are currently standing up an entirely new retail logistics and distribution network this year, as we are working on standing up some new capabilities. And as part of that, we are actively identifying up front, even though this particular network is designed to support our retail customers like Walmart, like Target, but our direct-to-consumer operation is also another single point of operation for us. We have a massive facility in Grove City, Ohio, that supports the entire U.S. business. And so if that, as an example, were ever to fail or come under some sort of stress because of weather or other natural disasters, then we would be in a tough spot. And so we are now in the process of designing capability to support e-commerce operations and direct-to-consumer operations that we may not use, but we know are there as we stand up this retail operation in other locations across the country. So it's really just about redundancies in your capacity and your ability to support either customer orders or inventory or production, just as a general concept, is something that we're looking at all the time. So that would be the other thing. And again, it's an obvious focus area, but it's something that we're very deliberate about.
Well, I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I have heard from a number of supply chain execs about, wanting to build in redundancy, but it's very expensive. And so many companies are not really able to do that. So definitely admire that you're able to actually implement that.
Yeah, and honestly, and that's true. But for us, we're trying to take advantage of some situations where we're looking for partners. As an example, currently right now, we're actually in the process of sending RFPs out as we speak, but companies that could do both if we wanted. So we're kind of building in the option on the front end to where we're not having to spend double the money to set up these capabilities. Now, primarily it'll be a retail operation, but if we had to scale quickly, could we do it? And looking at it in that way. And so it's different for everybody, obviously. And for us, we're an operation that's feasible. But if you have 30 distribution centers and 15 production sites around the world, and yes, it's going to be a lot harder. I fully acknowledge that. But it's still something that I think people, in companies should be looking at.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much, Justin Brown, Chief Supply Chain Officer at Dollar Shave Club.
Absolutely, Sarah. It's been my pleasure.